接下来呢，我们将正式开始我们今天主会场的访谈。第一个板块呢是积极促进中美交流与合作。这个板块的谈话呢，我们将看到的是一段炉边访谈的视频。嘉宾是美国黑石集团董事会主席、首席执行官及联合创始人苏世民先生。炉边谈话的采访人是清华大学1991级的校友、温社基金管理公司管理合伙人胡刚。好，让我们一起来观看这一段采访视频。
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the session. Our next speaker is someone probably don't need any introductory for this audience. Mr. Steve Schrossmann is the chairman, CEO, co-founder of Blackstone, a leading global investment firm with over $600 billion of AUM, with business in private equity, real estate, hedge fund, credit, infrastructure, and life sciences. In both business and philanthropy, he dedicates himself to tackling big problems with transformative solutions. His major gifts have helped establish a new center at the University of Oxford to redefine the study of humanities for the 21st century, create a new college at MIT dedicated to the study of artificial intelligence, build a first of its kind student center at Yale, renovate and expand the New York Public Library, and found an international fellowship program, Schrossmann Scholars at Tsinghua University in Beijing, to educate future leaders about China. Mr. Schrossmann is a member of Council on Foreign Relations, Business Roundtable, and International Business Council of the WEF. He was named one of Barron's World's Best CEOs in 2019, one of Forbes' top 50 world's most powerful people in 2018, Forbes' most influential person in finance in 2016, and one of Time's 100 most influential people in 2007. In 2019, Mr. Schrossmann published his first book, What It Takes: Lesson in Pursuit of Excellence, a New York Times bestseller, which draws his experience in business, philanthropy, and public service. Welcome to our panel.
Well, thank you very much.
So the first question I like to ask is, so most of the attendees in this conferences came to the States right after college, like myself. I probably spent more time in the United States than China. We have deep connections to both countries. What are the key changes that you have observed in the US-China relationship or landscape in the last 20, 30 years?
Well, it's really gone through a big evolution, as you know. And by the way, thank you for having me here with all my friends from Tsinghua. Part of this evolution was first the accession to the WTO around 2000, an era of great cooperation between the two firms, huge flows of students coming to the United States, and a period of rapid growth in China. Truly one of the most impressive achievements in modern history, without doubt. The huge rise of the middle class in China. Meanwhile, the U.S. got itself involved with a financial crisis in 2008. The politics within the U.S. started changing, and then we had the pandemic, which of course shut the world and created a very different environment. And U.S.-China relations evolved within that time frame and became much more complex and somewhat adversarial towards the end after the pandemic. U.S.-China relations shouldn't be seen just alone, as if those are the only two things that are happening. There's a lot of strange things happening in the United States on its own. And not just the United States, but also Western European countries. that the pandemic, in a way, has dramatically affected people's behavior, how they look at their lives, how they look at the world, and there's all kinds of reassessments going on within individual societies. But we're even seeing that now in China with this series of recent announcement regarding the business community. So we're at a time of internal reassessment as a result of COVID, among other factors, income inequality, which was highlighted during that period. And so there's a lot of change going on. The question is, how enduring will those changes be? Yeah. And are we just going through a set of adjustments in each of our societies separately, let alone together?
That's incredibly important factor, in fact. You're talking about individual society and the global environment. It feels like if everybody just taking care of themselves, then we're heading into something that we probably don't want to see. So talking about collaboration, talking about these two countries, what they can work together, where are the major aspects or big areas that you can see these two countries get back together and benefit both, in fact?
Well, the U.S. and China together have somewhere between 40 and 42% of the entire global economy. Think about how unusual that is. There are around 200 countries. Obviously not all equal size. China's got the largest population, the second biggest economy. U.S. is about 330 million people, not so much compared to 1.5 billion, but big compared to most countries. And we've got at the moment the largest economy. But two countries alone, with 40% roughly of the global economy, is highly unusual and extremely concentrated. So to have these two countries not in a cooperative mode, having friction in a variety of areas is somewhat unusual because they're both economically based powers, and so there's probably a need for that to resume on some better basis. Now, there's a lot in common that's concerning countries. First is climate. The Tsinghua alumni, a lot of them I think are here in the United States that are on this conference. You can see the weather changing here. If you can't see it, that just means you were visually impaired, and it's really happening.
Just last couple of weeks in New York, right?
It's terrible. People died here as a result of hurricanes that never would come here, and it was a leftover part of hurricanes, I guess Ida, and we're seeing whether it's more fires, floods, disruption, and it's hard to not understand that when this stuff is happening with enormous frequency, something is causing it, and China is, I guess, sort of got the biggest environmental issue in the world, and the U.S. I think is second. And so if these two countries can't cooperate and help clean up the world, that's not going to have a good outcome. And it affects the people in each country. It's not just not just being charitable. It's not just being a good sport. It's in each country's self awareness and in their benefit to be working together. And there's all kinds of things you can do. So that's one area where we should really be cooperating. And second is in healthcare. This is like the third pandemic that's come out of China, and in the last 20 years. And we're all dealing with it, not U.S. and China, but the world. And so any cooperation we can all do to minimize that. You've got the U.S. and China have the most number of vaccines under development. During the pandemic itself, there was an enormous need for medical supplies, which had been offshored by the U.S. because it was cheaper to make them other places, and then we found ourselves without adequate supplies. And China was providing supplies not just to the U.S., but to many countries.
That's true.
And so this coordination in the healthcare area with China generally, helping more and more hospitals, having as a national priority, increasing the wellness and the health care for their own people. This is a natural area where we should be spending time. There's issues like terrorism, not to be forgotten. And terrorism has different targets, but the idea of working together, nobody benefits from having terrorists operating in their country or with friends and allies. And this is an area that I think is another one. And there are all kinds of things that we can do together. Things have just gotten a bit radicalized at the moment. I understand why. I think most people understand that. Every time there's an action and a reaction and another action and another reaction, that cycle at some point has to be intercepted. Some of it's cyclical and it will just burn itself out. And then we'll say, okay, how do we pick up these pieces in a productive way for the good of each country, the two countries together, and let's not forget the world, which is so dependent on the U.S. and China.
But coming down to it, I mean, the whole thing started with the citizens from both countries. They probably are grabbing or competing on certain natural resources, on certain productivity gains. How do both countries can work together? So in your mind, to enhance the lives and economic advancement of their people, to make their individual people live better?
Well, each country has its own agenda for doing that. China is in a way the most interesting because it's going through the most changes as it's resetting its regulatory environment now. Whether it's in gambling or whether it's in the digital world or whether it's with games, whether it's with regulation in a general sense, where China's going through a huge reset. And one would say that it looks a little strange from the outside. When you look at it from the Chinese perspective, what they're doing is putting in new foundations for future growth.
Yes.
And China often goes through these resets. Every 5 or 10 years, they look at where they are and they say, I don't like that so much. And I'm going to change it.
Yes.
The difference between China and Western democracies is they have the ability to change it. What I found historically, there's usually some overshoot that occurs.
Yes.
And then the Chinese are terrific at fixing the overshoot.
Yes.
And it doesn't bother them. Whereas in Western democracies, it's quite uncoordinated, and somewhat disorganized, and so it doesn't happen with the rapidity that things do in China, and sometimes not as effectively, from an outcome perspective. So these two systems are operating almost on different time frames.
Yes, and they're almost trying to achieve the same goals.
Yes, well, a lot of these goals, for example, with the digital economy, many of the goals have big overlaps.
Yeah.
What's personal privacy? How do we control use of data?
Yeah.
The Chinese have, sort of a view where they can actually enforce what they want.
Yes.
Some people might be critical of that, but the Chinese aren't critical of it themselves. That's why they're doing it. We have needs for similar kinds of protections in the West, but we're struggling to figure out, how to get there.
Yeah, well, I don't know about other people. I, for one, would love somebody to tell my kids not to play video games.
Well, the video game thing was quite interesting. Yeah. When China, talk about different approaches, right? Every parent tries to convince their kid.
Yes.
Don't play so much in video games. That apparently is a losing argument. Which tells you either how attractive the games are or how addictive they are. In China, the solution is a much bolder one.
Yeah.
They don't try and convince their children because that's a losing argument. They just go to the producers who provide the games and say, okay, it's 3 hours a week, that's it. Nobody can gain access, and they'll get that problem under control.
That's probably true.
In the West, that speaks to people's rights, and so they have sometimes rights that don't end up with the right outcomes, for the society. It's the same with vaccination, where people choose not to get vaccinated, and they're infecting other people.
Yes.
And you can have that discussion of what is their right to affect other people.
Yeah.
And so that gets us down sort of some kind of rabbit hole discussion. So we should probably move on to something else that would be more useful to you.
Yes, let's move on to let's say along the same line about personal development. In your book, it's a fantastic book for any audience who haven't picked up a copy and read it. Highly suggested. You talk about being a 10. Very important. Spot problem. Coming up with solutions and lead the business over without even being asked to do so. For the audience, for all the Tsinghua alums right here, could you talk about how would one work to become a 10?
Well, it's hard to become one. It's like asking a great athlete. We'd all like to be great athletes. If you play tennis, why not play like Djokovic was ranked number 1 before he lost last weekend. But that happens from time to time. It's hard to create enormous natural talent like a great athlete. You can always improve whatever you are.
Yes.
I'm a great believer in that. I'm not much good at math, and I ended up somehow into finance, where apparently you use math, but fortunately it doesn't have to be that complex unless you're doing certain kinds of algorithms and equations. So I think I look for people, and this is how I think you build a great organization. It doesn't have to be Blackstone. It can be any business, any not-for-profit, any organization. You're looking for people who are smart and quick and flexible and dedicated to the mission that has been articulated for that organization. And you want them to be, if at all possible, natural leaders, good culture carriers. Every organization has to define what their culture is. in ours, we try never to lose money. That's part of the culture. Nobody likes to give somebody money and they turn up and apologize for losing it. This is not a recipe for great success. It doesn't work that way.
No.
So you have to teach people
Yes.
that's just, we don't go there if we think there's risk of loss of capital in any reasonable scenario. And so it's important to assemble a group of people who have similar beliefs. Not on all issues, not on political issues, not on issues of child raising or whatever, but in the area where your organization is functioning, everybody has to believe the same thing. If it involves hard work, you can't really have an effective organization with some people working really hard and other people leaving at 4:30.
That's a very interesting point.
It's so demotivating.
Yes.
And it's like an athletic team, like playing basketball, and one of your players decides they're just not going to run down the court.
And nobody else runs
You
down.
can't win. So you have to have people who have common beliefs working towards a goal. If the goal is excellence, then everybody better understand what that means. If you believe in meritocracy, which means the best people who accomplish the most, who work the hardest, they get ahead. And you have to be really open about that. You don't get ahead just for being nice and ineffective. It just doesn't work. So I think that within that context, there's always a hierarchy of who are your best players. Because whether you're Chinese or you're American or whatever, to win a championship, you have to have a great team, but you always have to have one or two really great players.
That's true.
And those are your 10s. Tom Brady in American football, he always seems to win. Michael Jordan when he was playing basketball, LeBron James. I mean, there are people who just stand out, and those are your franchise players. But no team typically has more than one or two of those remarkable people. And then you have your 9s. Those were your 10s. Then you have your 9s who are really terrific. They are great. You throw the ball their way, they'll catch it. They'll figure out where to run afterwards. They're really great. And what you find is that 9s and 10s working together get you an amazing team. One level down are 8s. They'll mostly do what they're told. They're pretty good at it, but they're not initiators. They're just like.
But do you need them?
Well, excuse me?
The 8s. Do you need them?
Well, if you could have nothing but 9s and 10s, that's what I'd have. But there aren't enough, and so you end up with people who are 8s, and there it's important that they understand the culture. They know the right thing to do. They have a positive spirit. They are not internally competitive with each other. That's like completely dysfunctional. So you have to make sure you don't hire people who are like that. Most organizations have a lot of people like that.
That's
At
true.
Blackstone, we don't do that. In internal political maneuvering and taking credit for things you never did, and not working with customers but thinking you can do better, marketing yourself internally. You've got to police that behavior. So that's what your organization looks like. Some organizations put 8s in charge of things. So what happens is 8s will hire 7s and 6s.
That's true.
At which point you have an
I
organization
remember
that
Steve
isn't
Jobs
doing
said something like that as well. Yeah.
anything that's really optimal. So that's how I look at things.
I see. So it feels like for you, the culture is probably the most important thing. It glues everyone together. And once you set the culture, you pick a 10 and then let the 10 does his wonder.
Yeah, well, yes, you have to have the culture first. You have to know what you're doing, because that's the way you attract people. They are attracted to that culture or they're not. And one of the other important things, I think, is to only hire nice people. I mean, there are gifted people who are weird.
100% agree
And,
with that.
you know,
Yeah.
your audience here probably knows some very weird people.
Very smart people.
Right, they're smart but weird. And basically what happens over time is those people are very difficult to have in an organization because they're either eccentric or they're interpersonally odd, or you have to keep managing around them. You know, in other words, you have a whole organization, then there's like some big boulder where the water goes around. You know, it's very difficult to get down a river, you know, sort of bumping into those kind of people. So if you want to have a good culture, don't have those people. And it's hard to not have them because they're gifted. But you'll do better in the longer term with very smart people without the eccentricity.
That is great advice. Along the same line, you talk about your investment, almost say, you know, never lose money. So you are probably one of the greatest investors of our time. Would you like to talk a little bit about your investment framework? Like if you see a piece of asset, some security, what makes you say yes? What makes you say no?
Well, I think the way you look at that is, you know, we all live in a context, in a broader world. And what are we looking for? We're you know, typically, we're looking on things that aren't going to go bad and are going to do really well, right? So you know, part of figuring that out is what kind of neighborhood are you in? Are you in a good neighborhood or a bad neighborhood? If you're trying to buy something in a bad neighborhood very cheaply, that's one type of investing. If you're trying to buy something in a great neighborhood where things are growing and there's innovation, and those are the disruptors in our society, and then there are the other companies that are being disrupted. Many companies or assets have aspects of both. They're disrupting somebody, but other parts of their business are being disrupted. So you first of all have to have a familiarization with technology to know what's going to be happening to you. Are you on the right side of innovation, of growth, of taking market share, delivering good products, or are you like a professional victim where something bad always appears to be happening? And even if those businesses are cheap, if longer term they're not adaptable, then you actually, even though it's tempting to buy those cheaply, longer term, that's a tough way to make money. It's a lot easier if you go where positive things are happening. And so we've tried to do that. You don't have to be in technology to do that, right? Because most people who are watching will say, geez, you know, technology sort of passed me by. That's not what I do.
I think that's probably 85 to 90% of the people.
Okay, but I'll give you an example of how you do this. So we started about 10 years ago looking at the trend to online shopping. My wife likes to do that. I don't, but I don't like shopping anyhow. But you could see that trend happening. And if you weren't a technologist, what you could do is figure out who's going to win and lose in that game, right? So the losers are going to be the stores in the shopping malls, or even in an urban environment, because their customers are going to start not buying things there. I mean, you don't have to be too smart for this stuff, right? You can see what's going to happen.
Yeah.
And then you look at the technology piece and say, well, look, I don't know anything about technology, but who's going to win in this new distribution world? And there are a lot of people who are going to win. But one, if you're not a technologist, that's going to win is the warehouses that are needed to stage the goods that get shipped to customers.
Yes.
And so we started buying warehouses about 10 years ago, and we sold all of our malls, right? So what's happened? The malls have decreased in value.
Yeah. Yeah.
And warehouses have become the best asset class
Yes.
in the world.
Yes.
I think our rents were going up at the rate of 10 to 12%, something like that. And we've become the largest owner of warehouses in the world. So how's that worked out? Answer, amazingly well.
Yeah.
We've got like 40% of our real estate assets in just warehouses.
Wow.
So we've become, pretty remarkable performer, for investors, because we concentrated in an area where we could see where the good neighborhood was going to be. So that's how we approach the world, with all this new streaming stuff in entertainment. We started buying studios to make programs. And what happened? When you had this explosion in new content,
Yes.
they have to make it someplace.
Yes.
So the rents in studios have exploded. You can't get studio space. We're just spending $1 billion in the UK, outside of London, to build another huge studio complex. Someday, it may be saturated again, but in the meanwhile, it takes a while to build these things, and the demand is huge. So you always try and take something where you can see something in society is happening. So rather than just read your newspaper or listen to CNBC or Bloomberg and say, well, that's happening, you have to think differently and say, what are all the pieces that get affected? How can I do something either on the technology side or, in some other side? You have the same thing, with hydrocarbons, where society is determined that that's less good, that it ought to be de-emphasized. So there's a whole series of things that you can do. In some of our businesses, we've basically lent billions and billions of dollars to people, a very good return for our investors to build solar facilities and other types of things. Don't have much technology risk. There's all kinds of different ways to do things, but you have to be alert to what's actually going on in the world and recognize that nothing is stable anymore. The old business models of doing the same thing your father and your grandfather did, if you keep doing that in the same way, the outcome will not be as good for you as it was for your father or your grandfather, because they were adapted to the world the way it was, not the world in terms of where it's going.
Well, along the way, you humbly said, we're not getting into the direct technology, or probably, but you did donate generously to all these technology institutions, right? So directly into technology, what catches your eyes?
Well, I've been fortunate enough to hang around people who actually know what they're doing, and I tend to have a pretty wide group of people that I interact with, and some people are like really amazingly smart. I also go to China a lot, or at least I did before the pandemic. In 2018 or 19, I forget which, I went 8 times.
Oh my God.
My wife was saying, what's wrong with you? So I got to meet a lot of people who were involved in the different generations of evolution with technology in China, actually soliciting them to give money to the Schrossmann scholars at Tsinghua. So I met like a huge number of people who've turned out to be people who've ended up on the front pages of all the newspapers, and I could see the waves of innovation coming, and probably about 6 years ago, something like that, people who really knew what they were doing started talking to me about artificial intelligence.
Wow.
And I was interested because I didn't know anything. And the views of these sort of most famous people in the world in technology on AI had a much different range of outcomes. How safe is this technology? How rapidly will it be adopted? What could it be used for? And so I could really see this, basically because other people focused me. I wouldn't have done this just sitting watching television in my house at night. And so once I learned what the power of the technology is, then that made me aware of all different kinds of things, including how do you introduce technology that'll be safe for large populations? How does the technology itself going to be evolving? How do algorithms work? And what can we apply it to help in the best way revolutionize society? And so there are very few countries that actually are big players in this. It's the U.S. and China.
The money, the capital.
U.S. and China, and there's some other countries. Russia's quite good, and Israel is good, and then there's some activity in France and Canada, much smaller. And so I realized this was pretty concentrated knowledge bases, and so I wanted to get involved to help this technology evolve in the right way. I wanted to help make America more competitive than it was at that time, which I think is slowly occurring. So I gave a big donation to MIT, which is everybody in your audience will know is one of the best technology universities in the world, if not the best, because there are other people who are good too. And so for me, that was fascinating and important to do. It doesn't benefit me directly as a person, but I try to look out for what's good for society. I don't know why. It's just sort of the way I've evolved with my life, and so I've spent a bunch of time in that area.
Yeah, I remember in your book that what strikes me the most is at the end you said, always ask what you can do for other people, solve other people's problem.
Yeah.
I think that's tremendous. I guess one last question, along the side of technology, we talk about games, we talk about AI. There are positives and negatives of technology to the social benefits, and how would you propose as a society, how do we use technology and for its positive side, but can somehow contain its negative impact towards the society?
Well, what I'd say, that's a tough one, because each country, each society, looks at that differently. And that's because of where does the innovation come from? It either comes from universities, it comes from companies, it's got government that's sort of a gatekeeper as to what it wants. I think though there are certain natural areas where there can be enormous benefits. I don't care what country you're from. One is in education. It could be somewhat standardized, but the ability to reach everyone in a society with the highest quality content, with great teachers and great process, that's a wonderful potential future benefit. There are all kinds of advantages that can be done in healthcare. We saw that in the pandemic. All of a sudden, people couldn't go to a doctor, so what happened? They were dealing with doctors online. And you found out that was pretty terrific. Technology will allow you, I know this sounds pretty weird, that you can take a photo of somebody's eye and put it on a computer, and then, like, I forget whether it's 18 or 23 readings you can get as to what's going on inside a person to figure out whether they're okay or they're not. And this is just sort of the start of these types of things, and in the development of drugs for trials and other types of things. There are people who believe you'll be able to cut the timing on drug development as well as the costs in a very, very major way. And you can start going through other areas. So I think technology can be an enormous force for good for regular people, not just the experts who are venture capitalists and they're making a lot of money, or companies that are rapidly growing, and but for society at large, it can be great. Just as a final thing, you can buy my book on Amazon. So all of you frustrated people out there who haven't read it, it's What It Takes. It's by me, Steve Schrossmann. I actually was lucky enough to have the book printed in Mandarin. And released in China. And for a few weeks after the book reading period, whatever, I think it was April, a year and a half ago, it was the #1 book in China.
Yeah, I was surprised to see many people actually have the Chinese version.
Yes, and that sold really, really well. In fact, better than in any other place in the world. On the other hand, there are many more Chinese than there are, sort of Americans. So it's easy to buy. And what happens, I found, is that people give it to other people. And particularly, parents give it to teenagers or college-age children, because parents have a lot of trouble talking to their children about what they think, what they want them to do, because children at a certain age, they're going through a separation.
Well, if it's from your parents, it's wrong.
Right, and so I get emails every day from people all around the world saying, I gave this to my son, I gave this to my daughter. They really loved it, thank you.
Yes, I think the book also gives them a flavor of what a person like you are thinking about it. Still going back to solve other people's problem. That is so important everywhere in the world. Well, thank you very much, Mr. Schrossmann, to join us. I'm pretty sure me and our audience have all benefited a lot listening to your
I'm very
views.
loyal to Tsinghua.
Thank you.
And
we appreciate it.
We built a college there.
Yes.
Schwarzman College, which is very beautiful. It got an award, best academic facility, whatever year we built it in Asia. And I have so many friends at Tsinghua, from the very top with President Cho and Madam Chen, to professors, students, and so forth. So I'm very excited that Tsinghua has gone up in the rankings around the world. From when I started working with them, they were number 54. Now they're number 16.
Wow.
So that reflects well on everybody who's on this this video. So congratulations to you all.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much.
好的，非常感谢两位给我们带来的精彩分享，我们也非常期待能够看到中美在气候变化、医疗健康等领域的深度交流与合作。同时也非常感谢苏世民先生分享的关于技术创新、商业投资和个人发展的洞见，相信大家和我一样都是收获颇丰。